we've seen more than 300, 400 seizures now in our studies. So I think our solution can help supplement the work that parents, teachers, and pediatricians are doing to help give them that objective data to get the kids in the right pool at the right time so that they can be treated faster.
My name is Chris Johnson, and this is Healthcare Tomorrow. Thank you for joining today. We're joined with Chief Operating Officer Parth Amin. Thank you so much for joining us, Parth. Tell us more about why Eysz is spelled E-Y-S-Z.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. And yeah, we get that question asked a lot. So our company was founded by Rachel Cooperman, a brilliant pediatric epileptologist. During her time at UCSF Benioff Children's, she was doing some studies to prove out the concept. Could we use eye movements to identify seizures? And she successfully proved that out. And when she founded the company, she took the combination of eyes and seizures and came up with Eysz.
Fantastic. So what exactly is Eysz doing?
So we are an early stage startup with 3 employees. We are building a digital health platform to help doctors better diagnose and treat neurological and psychiatric symptoms using objective data. And that objective data is eye movements.
Fantastic. And that's in what type of patient? Is it peds, adults?
So our initial focus is in the pediatric market, and then we will expand to adults.
Fantastic. What brought you to the company, and what is your lead up, and why Eysz?
So I've always had a fascination for applying tech in healthcare. It started off early in my career. I graduated with an engineering degree, started working at Siemens Healthcare in the radiation oncology space. I started off my career as a software engineer, and at that time I was just thinking that I would be working forever and retire with Siemens, all in the engineering space. And then within, I think it was about 6 weeks within my career at Siemens, I was asked to collaborate with a partner of ours. But at the same time, I was told, don't collaborate too much with them because they're our competitor.
Okay.
So that's when I got introduced to this concept of co-opetition. I started learning more about partnering. Eventually, over my career, I started spending more and more time on partnerships and alliances and grew fascinated with the fact that majority of partnerships and alliances failed. Back in 2018, I was actually mentoring startups on how to use partnerships and alliances to scale effectively, just based on my experience. And that's when I met Rachel Cooperman. At that time, she was working on some research and trying to get her company going. And I engaged with her on a 3-week contract to basically help her find an eye tracking partner. And as I started working more closely with her, I kind of grew disturbingly fascinated with neurology. I feel like it's where oncology was probably about 35 to 45 years ago. There's no biomarkers. There's lack of standardized treatment protocols, diagnostic protocols. And this is ripe for disruption in terms of applying tech to help solve some of these problems. So I decided to join her full time.
So considering that you've got your engineering background and obviously you're thinking with that type of discipline, what has been kind of the surprise in this medium? Using a phone as a diagnostic tool, that's very different than traditional medicine.
Yeah, so since we started the company back in 2018, we've done 6 clinical studies, and our hypothesis was that we could use eye tracking hardware to collect the data we need to basically identify the neurological or psychiatric symptoms. And when we started to talk to Microsoft and Apple and Samsung, we realized a lot of the hardware equipment were not designed for kids. So that was one issue. The second issue is that when we started to analyze the data coming from our studies that were using off-the-shelf eye tracking equipment, we realized we could actually utilize data from 30 hertz video signal, which was the same frame rate as a selfie recording on a cell phone. And so we realized the cell phone is more ubiquitous than eye tracking hardware. Everybody's got a cell phone, regardless of race, income, geography. And so we're like, people are walking around with a diagnostic tool, right? And so that's how we started to focus on the cell phone.
Yeah, the whole cell phone as the device brings in so many questions for me. It's really hard to not just do rapid fire. So I'm sure that we'll get into a lot of that.
Sure.
So when you think about, you joined the company, you had been with the same organization for a long period of time, and a very established, you know, heavily resourced, on and on type of institution, really one of the icons of our healthcare system. What's been the change for you in the upstart small healthcare space?
So I think there's several things. Working at larger companies that are publicly traded, we would have mission statements, but we tend to get measured quarterly,
Right.
right? We had to hit the numbers. We had to do what it takes to hit the numbers. At the startup level, I feel like we're only mission driven,
Right.
right? And, we get to talk to patients directly. And I get to experience more different types of positions that I would have never gotten exposed to. So I'm learning a lot more. But, to describe what it was working at a well-established, process-oriented company versus a startup, I just say it's positively chaotic every day, right?
Well, and I would think that for a startup that is truly pioneering not just the device, but also pioneering the specialty field. So neurology being an arena that really is looking at different ways of doing things than they've ever done it. That's got to be pretty exciting to be in the middle of that with physicians, run by a physician, and then also as an engineer.
Yeah.
Right. So are there any times when, because most startups, there's definitely this discussion between the medicine versus the execution and the actual design work. Tell us a little bit about some of those discussions and what that looks like, and being able to bring something to market, because you've actually made it through the gauntlet. You've got a completion. So
Yeah, so I think, Rachel and I, the strongest thing about us is we always have healthy debates. And, that's the one thing I respect about her. She's always educating me on the medicine, and I'm willing to learn. And she's the same way when it comes to on the business side, right? And sometimes what, she wants for medicine may not always fit for what we need in business, or what I want in business may not always fit in the medicine. So, some of the things that we've discussed or encountered was, we developed a solution that we initially thought would be helpful for neurologists. And then as we started thinking about it more, I was like, let's look at it from the pediatric side. And with her experience from the pediatrician side, they're typically technology averse. They're so slammed, and it wasn't quite clear if there would be a market. And so we started doing some customer discovery, and turned that the pediatricians would be a market, right? Where from the engineering side, I was like, eye tracking hardware, that's cool. Let's use eye tracking. And as she was like, I don't think doctors are going to really want to deal with all this hardware. And so as we started talking with more doctors, it turned out they don't need this eye tracking equipment. They just need summaries. Like, is this kid still having a seizure? Yes, no.
Right.
They don't want to deal with equipment. They just want it quick and fast.
So does the phone as the device, does that make this happen? If you had to design and come up with your own device, would you be approved already and running commercially?
So we're a software as a medical device, which is, a lot of traditional medtech VCs have a trouble of understanding, right? They can understand the implantables, they can understand the digital health wellness apps, but we're kind of in the middle. We're a digital health company that's regulated by the FDA as a medical device. So for us, we're hardware agnostic. Whether we're getting the data from an eye tracking hardware, whether we're getting the data from a cell phone, it's our software that's analyzing the data and helping to produce the results to help doctors identify these conditions.
So considering that you were so successful in bringing this through the FDA, were there specific questions regarding the device itself and the kind of the human factors, or was it all software and review?
So it was all software and review. We knew we wanted to be a software as a medical device because just dealing with manufacturing our own hardware and, as components change or having to deal with various head sizes in kids, because that's why Microsoft and Samsung and them are not in the pediatric space, because the kids' head size keep changing year after year. Right. And so the question is, would we have to deal with that if we're building our own
Right.
eye tracking kit? And so, we had conversations with the FDA, but we knew when going into the FDA, we're going to be a software as a medical device, and we established that up front.
So you said something there. I've got to go back and clarify. So the size of the pediatric's head is changing over time. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
That's
so
interesting.
You look at a newborn kid,
Right.
and year after year, the kids.
So the growth, the maturation. Okay.
Yeah. So their head size is physically growing
Right.
because their brain's growing.
Right.
What they call the interpupillary distance is also growing. And so these are things that make it difficult to develop a one-size-fits-all kind of eye tracking device.
That makes sense. Okay.
So
So when you think about the fact that, so it took you how long to go from the beginning of research and kind of getting everything agreed upon from a methodology standpoint to actually getting approved by the FDA? What was that timeline like?
So we had our first NIH-funded study, I think, back in 2019.
Okay.
And then the one thing the NIH does is that they actually encourage us to go out and talk to potential customers and partners to understand what are the problems, what are the opportunities. So after our first study completed, where we had kids, I think we had about 200 kids come in for a routine video EEG wearing eye tracker equipment, we got some prelim data showing that, hey, we can identify seizures from the eye movement. So as part of our customer discovery program with the NIH, we spoke to a bunch of doctors, and we're like, we know you have this problem. What do you think of this? And, from those interviews, we realized they didn't want to deal with the hardware. They just wanted simple outputs from the device.
Right.
And, if we actually talked to parents were like, I'd rather not my kid have to wear something that makes them stand out.
Right.
And so we started looking at our data. And as I mentioned before, we realized we could use the 30 hertz video signal from the eye tracking equipment, which is similar to a cell phone.
Right.
So
Right.
that's how we ended up with the cell phone. And that took about, I think, we finished our study the first study in 2021. And I think it was around early 2021, we realized we're going to go with the cell phone. And then we started building out the concept And then we had some pre-submissions with a meeting with the FDA. And then at that time, our first application, there was a predicate device on the market to do seizure monitoring using a wristwatch.
Okay.
And so we're like, okay, we'll just do a 510K and then we'll be this as a predicate.
Right.
And then our technology actually provokes a certain type of seizure, which is a standard practice in neurology. And the predicate was actually for seizure monitoring, not seizure provocation. So the FDA, and which was another surprising thing I learned on the journey, was a very collaborative group and still very collaborative. And so they saw that we were trying to make our device fit as a predicate. And, after several meetings with them, we realized we're not going to be a predicate. So they were saying if we were going to stay with the same claims, we'd have to be a de novo.
Right. Right.
And as a startup, an additional 3 years, $1 million, that wasn't in our
Right.
wheelhouse to do. So we had to adjust our claims. We found a different product code, and then we went to market with that as a FDA registered device.
So we'll take a step back.
Yeah.
And when you say seizure, that kind of brings a lot of images to folks. Kind of define and explain the seizure we're talking about.
Yeah, so I was actually ignorant of epilepsy when I started working with Rachel, and she's educated me on quite a bit. And I didn't know that 80% of all seizure types are like non-convulsive. I thought seizures were this wild shaking seizures, and she said no, that's only 20%. Most seizures are people just staring for seconds or minutes.
Right.
And you can't even tell half the time.
Right.
So, yeah. And then I did not know epilepsy's been around for 5,000 years and we still don't understand it. We're still learning a lot about it.
Right.
And the way it's diagnosed, the way it's treated, we're still learning a lot more. It's not well established. So, yeah.
So I have a personal interest in the absent seizures, or the silent seizures, as a lot of people will call them. When I was in kindergarten, my teacher noticed that I was staring off and brought it to my family's attention. Went through all the having the leads, all through the scalp. And really being able to monitor and figure out what was going on. So I was diagnosed probably, late 70s. Went through a period of, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years of taking medication. And so, yeah, when we met and I heard about this, I was immediately drawn to, well, what changes have been made? This is obviously a totally different way than having the leads put, all over your scalp to figure out what's going on. So, yeah, I personally have been through this, so it's interesting.
Nice. And what was how did the teachers identify this, and what was the conversation like with your parents?
Yeah, so the way, of course I was so young when it happened, but the way I remember is I didn't realize that I was staring off. I was completely unaware that during the teacher's lecture from the front of the classroom, or writing on the chalkboard, that my eyes would not be following along with anything, that I would just basically be staring off sort of towards the chalkboard.
Right.
So if you think about, 25 or however many kids in a classroom, and all eyes are on her, and then all of a sudden you see in the second row, little Christopher's eyes are kind of panning off, but not really looking at anything. And I would think that teachers were somewhat aware of having multiple students over different years have this problem. So
Yeah.
it was probably something that teachers may be the best at picking up on some of these things medically. And so I benefited from it.
Yeah. No, that's quite lucky because right now we're seeing that teachers are just simply overwhelmed,
Right.
and having 30 kids in a class and with all the stuff going on digitally, sometimes they're just not aware of even these types of seizures as being a potential issue, and so typically they'll just say the kid's zoning out, not paying attention, which sometimes get misinforms for an ADHD test,
Right.
right? So you're quite lucky.
Yes. There's also this overlap with ADHD.
That's right.
So talk a little bit about the overlap and why delineation is even important.
Yeah. So one of the reasons we're studying the childhood onset epilepsy population and have been studying it for the last 6 years is that not only is it the most common pediatric epilepsy in kids, but it also has a high co-occurrence rate with ADHD, has a high co-occurrence rate with depression, anxiety. And so, we're studying this homogeneous population to build out a platform for these different conditions. And so, as I started learning more about epilepsy, I was just surprised at the interlinkage between different conditions and especially how where it affects the brains. So, like there's, I think it's like 40% of kids with autism have epilepsy, 40% of kids with epilepsy have ADHD, and then I think it's 30 to 40% of ADHD have autism. There's like this interlinkage, co-occurring conditions. And, all three of these conditions were identified as a kid with staring.
Right. Right.
And so, as a pediatrician trying to screen for this, kid comes in with staring. How are you supposed to figure out,
Right.
are these co-occurring conditions? Are these separate conditions?
Right.
Or is the staring related just to mood issues like depression and anxiety?
True.
Right. So, so I was very surprised at how interlinked epilepsy is with other neurological conditions.
Right.
And then I was just surprised, epilepsy is now being considered a spectrum. You could have mild epilepsies, you can have severe epilepsies based on the different types of seizures. And epilepsy, there's no cure for epilepsy. You can have the seizures go into remissions, but you may still have a lot of these co-occurring conditions that are because of the epilepsy. So this was really eye-opening for me, having come from oncology where there's clear biomarkers, you know if the treatment's going well or not. But for epilepsy, just even diagnose it,
Right.
it's a challenge compared to like oncology.
Is there a lot of almost frustration, even potential misdiagnosis? And I think about a lot of young boys that are kindergarten through second grade that are, they're bored in class, they're not paying attention, and they're staring off into space. Does that student or that personality type ever get thrown in where they're something like this is weeding out the, here's the medical problem, here's the medical issue?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, it's childhood onset epilepsy is more common in girls than boys.
Okay.
And it's just like inattentive ADHD, which is more common in girls than boys. And so when kids are, not paying attention or zoning out, is there the risk for misdiagnosis? There definitely is. We're blessed to have an awesome medical advisor, Dr. Katie Layler from Children's of Alabama, a pediatric neurologist. She herself had childhood onset epilepsy, but was misdiagnosed for having anxiety for a long period of time. But that anxiety was being caused by her epilepsy because she was getting nervous and didn't want to, partake in things, and she was worried about the seizures happening.
Right.
And, the other thing which is really challenging for doctors and parents is that, as I mentioned, when epilepsy co-occurs with ADHD, especially childhood onset epilepsy, the attention deficits present earlier and the seizures present later.
Okay.
So the kid can be diagnosed with ADHD, but when it's co-occurring, it's that epilepsy causing the ADHD. And what's challenging for doctors is, yes, you made that diagnosis because it showed up first, but when you treat co-occurring conditions, you have to treat the seizures first and then go back and treat the ADHD.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
it makes it a real challenge. And there's no good tools out there to figure out if a kid has a seizure or not.
Right.
And simply just referring kids to get an EEG
Right.
creates a long wait time,
Sure. Of course.
right?
Does the treatment of ADHD create any unique issues with the treatment of the epilepsy?
So you want to treat the seizures first
Right.
and then treat the kids with ADHD. If you continue,
But if you didn't know that you had the seizures,
if you didn't know you had the seizures, the ADHD medications would not be working because the kid's going to still show up with attention deficits that are being displayed by the seizures, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Which drives the need for separating and having a better understanding of what you're dealing with. So it's not that you're just looking at and trying to diagnose what is the problem, but where does the problem occur in the timeline, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would even say, we're actually before the diagnosis.
Right.
We're actually helping the pediatricians triage.
Right.
Am I sending this kid to neurology? Am I sending this kid to a developmental behavioral pediatrician for autism? Am I sending this kid to a child psychiatrist? Right? Right now, the pediatricians, they're so overworked. They have very limited tools, and they're relying on questionnaires and self-reported data.
Right.
And so it's tough.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely. So the name of this, we'll call it diagnostic process. You can tell me what you call it, but the hyperventilation recording, why is it called a hyperventilation?
So hyperventilation, I think it's been around since the 1960s.
Okay.
And child neurologists have been using this as part of their initial neurological exam when kids come in for suspicion of absence seizures or staring spells. And so what it is just a breathing test where the doctor will pull out a pinwheel or a tissue, and it's rapid breathing for about 3 minutes at a target rate about 20 breaths per minute. And I'm not quite sure medically what the impact is, but it's something has to do with like reducing the oxygen levels to the brain, which actually then triggers this type of seizure, absence seizures. Yeah. And so hyperventilation can be used as a diagnostic to identify kids with absence epilepsy. It provokes absence seizures greater than 90% of the time in kids with epilepsy. It's a safe and effective procedure. It's actually the standard of care activation procedure during an EEG. So all kids coming in for an EEG are getting hyperventilated as part of that EEG to provoke and see if they have that seizure type.
Got it.
So there was a research article that said hyperventilation is basically so effective that a child neurologist will question the diagnosis of absence epilepsy if the kid's seizure was not provoked during hyperventilation during the EEG. And there's some other articles that show hyperventilation is more effective than the 6-hour video EEG to assess treatment response, right? So basically what we've done is we've taken a known manual process test and basically we've digitized it. We're now trying to standardize it, and we're gamifying it to make it fun for kids and easy to implement. Yeah.
So let's take a look at what this looks like. We've got a video that you brought. If we can go ahead and bring that up, and then you can talk through what's happening both by the clinician and for the patient.
Right.
Yeah.
So our product is called the Eysz Hyperventilation Recorder. It's a mobile app that we provide with a phone. And so basically you just have the patient sit normal in a chair in the office in the clinic. We provide the tripod to basically help set up the selfie recording. And so it's a very friendly, intuitive application that fits into a busy clinic. The nurse would just sign in, or the doctor would sign in. They would register the patient or search for the patient if it was already populated. And then you're basically setting up the kid up for that selfie recording I talked about. And the first thing they would do is then watch a 1-minute Popeye cartoon where we're just collecting baseline information on the kid's face and eyes. And then this is where they play the hyperventilation game, where they're trying to get the lady on the bike across the beach in 3 minutes. Every time they blow with the purple cloud, the microphone picks up the breath flow and then moves the bike faster to help her to get across the finish line. Now, after that, they watch another 1-minute Popeye cartoon because they can still have a seizure 1 minute post hyperventilation. And then they submit the video for processing. And once it's uploaded to the cloud, they can actually review the video to see if they missed anything. Because right now, there's no way to go back and review anything because you're doing it live on a tissue.
Right.
So you get a clear HD video recording, and then our system will generate a report in less than 48 hours for the doctor, and then they can then use the report basically to decide, am I referring this kid to neurology? Am I going to continue with ADHD med? Maybe he's got something else, and I should probably send him to neuropsych.
So who handles the report? Is that done by an internal physician? How does that work?
How does the report get generated?
Yeah.
Yeah. So right now we have a human reader, which is Rachel, the pediatric neurologist. So when the videos get uploaded from the pediatrician's office, she does a preliminary analysis. And based off that preliminary analysis, a report is generated. But the ultimate decision is made by the pediatrician.
Right.
Rachel's just helping them to identify areas of concern.
Right.
And on the back end, we're actually training AI models to be able to identify these symptoms directly from the hyperventilation recordings.
So since we're in the middle of kind of throwing the insurance word around, talk a little bit about that. What's been the overall communication between Eysz and insurance companies, and how that partnership is looking?
Yeah, so I think there's twofold. So like during our fundraising, I think what was new for me is when we were talking to insurance companies as potential investors into the company, I was very surprised to hear them say that epilepsy is not a concern for them. And I was shocked. I was like, what are you talking about? This is like a neurological disease that affects millions of people, just in the US and even around the world. And so what they meant by that is that it's not a top 10 disease spend for them.
Right.
Right. And, they're only looking at the financial impact within 18 months. And epilepsy is a long, drawn-out chronic disease.
Right.
So that's why you see a lot of insurers invest in stuff for oncology or cardiology, because the drug spends can be higher.
Correct.
And there's more immediate impact.
Right.
So that's on one side. But, on the other side, we are doing planning for a health economic study to show that we can actually help save payers money by doing a better screening and getting the right patients to the subspecialists faster. Because, the insurance companies want to work on improving access, reducing wait times, which is something our technology has shown to do.
Right. Right. So, there's the term personalized medicine. There's a certain appropriateness to me where this is a personalized or almost customized to the individual that is using the device. It's not so broad-based, broad stroke. And because you're looking at, like you said, 3 different patient populations and trying to determine where do you fit? What bucket are you? Or are you in all 3 buckets? And so it seems to be that that's a major question for insurance companies to answer is, are you eliminating patients out of certain buckets that should be eliminated? We have so many comorbid
Right.
diseases within our healthcare system right now. There are so much spend or the amount or distribution of that spend for folks that probably were misdiagnosed or are being overly aggressively treated in arenas that they shouldn't be.
Right.
Just because we have a lack of diagnostic tools, or we just treat with blood test only. So, I mean, do you view this as part of the solution to that?
I definitely view it as part of the solution. I mean, I think the question is, it's a rhetorical question, but is having objective data along with subjective data going to be better than just having subjective data alone? I was kind of surprised. It was a learning opportunity for me. I did not know, ADHD is basically diagnosed using 18 questions,
Right,
right?
right,
You're thinking like a neurological condition in the brain,
right.
18 questions, that's done by the parents, that's done by the teachers to answer your question. I'm like, these are not clinical professionals. They may not always be with the kids. They may be making assumptions that we're not aware of. And
right.
so they actually do show that there's a paper that said, 1 in 5 kids diagnosed with ADHD are actually misdiagnosed, meaning they have some other underlying condition probably causing the attentional issue.
Right.
Because there's so many issues that co-occur with ADHD or even mimic ADHD. So it's really hard. And so I think our solution can help supplement the work that parents, teachers, and pediatricians are doing to help give them that objective data to get the kids in the right pool at the right time so that they can be treated faster.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, there's a certain percentage of these patients that grow out of the silent seizures or the seizures
Yeah.
that they're struggling with. Does that drive the clinician or reimbursement to say, we're not going to focus on this because they're just going to grow out of it anyway?
So we're still, as I said, we're still learning a lot more about epilepsy, and there was new research showing that if you actually catch these kids earlier and treat them earlier, you can alter their natural history so that they're less likely to develop other severe seizures or refractory epilepsy. Now, going back to your question, do kids grow? About a third of these kids can probably grow out of it, but 2/3 go on to develop those severe seizures or refractory epilepsy.
Right.
So, it's been deemed a wolf in sheep's clothing, this seizure type, because undiagnosed, untreated absence seizures has the same outcomes as undiagnosed, untreated inattentive ADHD.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
it's a silent seizure with silent, negative outcomes as well.
Right. So obviously, in order to be where you are, you ran a study and you were looking at the patient population against placebo. Did you want to discuss any of your findings or how that turned out?
Yeah, so once we decided we came up with the product, we got FDA registration, the NIH funded a post-market study. We basically had 60 kids come in for a routine video EEG. These kids either had suspicion of staring spells, suspicion of absence seizures, or known absence seizures. And so as they were getting their video EEG, which is the gold standard, they were getting hyperventilated with our device. So we had 3 independent neurologists review the hyperventilation video separately. And then we had 3 independent neurologists at Cincinnati Children's review the video EEG. And then we compared the sensitivity and specificity of the smartphone video readers to the video EEG readers. And the smartphone video readers, surprisingly, were 100% sensitive and 91% specific to the video EEG readers for absent seizures greater than 7 seconds. Now, below 7 seconds, the video EEG readers couldn't agree, so we couldn't have a benchmark, right?
Right.
But this was extremely positive data for us. We actually had the opportunity to present this at the American Academy Pediatrics National Conference this past September. And, we were honored to also achieve the 2025 AAP Product Innovation Award.
So, obviously the name of this show is Healthcare Tomorrow.
Yeah.
So when you think about, you're doing it right now. I mean, this isn't tomorrow, this is today. But at the same time, you're brand new and you're doing something innovative that is going to change how things are done in the future. So you're still very much a tomorrow solution. So what exactly, as one of the C-suite executives of Eysz, trying to figure out how do we make that happen? How do we change the paradigm of how things have always been done? Not just, having the study, not just working out reimbursement, but what's the plan in order to change behavior?
That's a good question. So you're basically asking the question is how do you make a widget that solves a problem into the standard of care solution?
Absolutely.
And I've been fortunate to work at companies like Varian Medical Systems, like Vision RT, where they actually, had a very diligent strategy in that they executed on to become standard of care. And as you said, it's not just getting reimbursement. It's not just getting clearance. It's, getting adoption takes a lot of work. But, what we're also realizing is before we can even talk about our solution, we have to educate on the problem.
Right.
And so we have started to, and the beauty about this is Rachel, being a child neurologist, she knows a lot of her peers in the child neurology community, given that there's only 1,500.
Right.
And there's a lot of child neurologists that are willing to volunteer their time to educate the primary care community about these conditions. So we're tapping into that to get talks at major conferences just to educate on the problem. And then it's, doing case studies and then doing the health economics to get the payers on board, because the payers, whether people like it or not, influence how care is delivered. Right? And so if we can show the benefits to the healthcare providers, if we can show the clinical impact to the providers, I think it's going to be a long, drawn-out process. They typically say to make something standard of care take 7 to 10 years.
Right. So to all, everything always comes back to resources and funds, right? So there's always a certain level of driving fundraising. And then a lot of that is being driven by what's the potential for the market. Can you kind of give us a little insight on what those two?
Yeah, so the fundraising strategy has been a real interesting journey for me. Having worked at companies that have, maybe $1 billion on the balance sheet, have billions in revenue, we had to write business cases internally to convince stakeholders that this is a worthwhile project. But, when it comes to raising money from VCs or angels, it's been a real eye-opening journey for me. I think couple of things is that, you know, one of the things that struck me the most is like, Rachel and I, we've agreed what our journey is going to be from a commercial perspective. We know we want to work within the medical system. So when we're talking to many VCs, they were like, oh, you should consider becoming a virtual care company and hire child neurologists. And we're like, there's only 1,500 child neurologists. Like, where are we going to get them from? And then they were like, oh, you should go direct to patients. And we're like, epilepsy is not a disease of the rich.
Right.
Many of these patients are on Medicaid. And, having them to pay out of pocket for a solution is not what we want to do either. So it was really interesting to see how many people were trying to tell us what our model should be.
Sure.
And then I think the second thing that was the biggest eye-opening thing for me is how many investors told us to get out of pediatrics because that's not where the money is at. The money is at with adult care and Medicare. And I'm like, isn't that kind of backwards? Don't you want to take care of the kids first? And, I also do want to say, I want to give a shout out to our largest investor, who's UCB Pharma. Sorry, I've been digressing a bit, but so we did a pre-seed round of about $2 million back in 2022, which UCB was our largest investor. And, it was really inspiring to see that this was not an investment for them to get rich off of.
Right.
This was an investment that they said is part of a longer journey because the drug companies do not have a good way of identifying these types of seizures or the co-occurring conditions during drug trials. There are studies showing that you don't learn about the side effect profile of a drug in neurology until it's been 10 years on the market.
Wow.
Because it's all subjective information during the trials. So we've had UCB Pharma, a couple of angels that understood what we're doing. But when it came to trying to raise VC money at the seed stage, the goalpost had moved. They're now asking for, $500,000 in ARR. And we're like, this is going to be a challenge to get $500,000 ARR with 3 people. Right. And so we realized we're probably not VC ready. So the largest non-dilutive investor has been the NIH and the NSF.
Okay.
We've secured about, I think, close to $7 million in grants. And we've had a really high success rate with getting grants because they appreciate, I think, the innovation going into a large unmet need.
Right.
And
it's pediatric.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
So as far as taking the same technology design format and looking at other uses, is that is that happening? Or?
Yeah. So it was interesting is when I mentioned that very first study to you where we had a bunch of kids come in, put on eye tracking glasses, and then basically we were looking at the periods of when kids were having seizures, and then we were seeing what their eyes were doing. So that's the NIH kind of grants have been focusing on the seizure aspect. We then got a National Science Foundation grant for that same study. Say, well, what do the eye movements look when the kids are not seizing? When the kids have epilepsy versus the kids that don't have epilepsy?
Right.
When the kids are on medications versus not on medications? And we started to see a signal in the eye movements for kids that have the epilepsy versus don't have the epilepsy. So then we did a broader based study with the National Science Foundation, which we just completed in August of this year, to basically look at eye movements in kids and compare it to the gold standard questionnaires for anxiety, depression, sleep, ADHD testing. And from our initial analysis, we're seeing eye movement signatures that correlate to some of these symptoms. And so our product is a platform that utilizes mobile technologies and web technologies. Our first application is for absence seizures. So we do plan on releasing other applications for identifying attentional issues and then mood issues. And then our most recent grant came in September of this year, just before the shutdown. And that's basically taking our first application and expanding it to home use to assess treatment response, which is what we will then do for the other screening applications as well. So not only do we want to help with the screening.
Define what you mean by home use. Do you mean that parents would be doing what was being done in the office?
That's correct.
Okay.
And it would be prescribed by the doctor. So these aren't just,
Right.
we wouldn't just have parents download our app
Right.
and start doing something at home. This is where the doctor would prescribe the app, send a link to the parent's phone. And so right now when kids get put on medication, they haven't made a diagnosis of absence epilepsy, get prescribed treatment, you know, it's hard for the doctors right now to figure out what's going on at home.
Right.
And so the parents think, oh, maybe I have to stay at home and I got to count his seizures.
Right.
But these silent seizures are hard to count. The kid's at school.
Right.
So the doctor gets this unstructured data, like an Excel file or a Word document saying my kid had 30 seizures.
Right.
The doctor doesn't know what to do with that. And when Rachel got that kind of information, she just put it aside because it wasn't helpful. And so now the thinking is that if the kid gets prescribed our app, they would hyperventilate twice a week for the first 4 weeks. Now, if the medication is working, it's going to take longer to induce the seizure, and the duration of the seizure will get shorter. Now the doctor will have some objective data
Right.
to know if the medication is working.
So this makes sense for parents. I almost am curious, would there be any interest in schools with the school nurse to be involved in some way? Or
Yeah, so we've actually talked to the National Association of School Nursing. There is interest, but the thing is that unfortunately, our healthcare system all comes down to finance.
Right.
And so what we're looking at is like certain school-based health systems
Right.
can seek reimbursement for using CPT codes, but sometimes they're limited as to which codes they can use.
Right.
And in order to get a new code in for them to bill, it's this long drawn out process.
Right.
And, it's not clear where the budget comes from all the time, from state to state, county to county. It's very different.
Sure.
Yeah. But in general, school nurses are on the front line now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And having a tool like this would be super helpful. And we heard it from them. The question is, how do we make it financially viable for everyone?
Yeah, it just seems to be that there's a percentage of parents that would do a really good job with this.
Yeah.
And then, like with every population, there's going to be a percent that struggle or don't have the time, the means, the effort. So again, trying to make sure that you're reaching as many kids as you can.
Yeah.
That's an opportunity.
Right.
Still to use a professional, a healthcare provider, but not have to go to a primary care office or a pediatrician's office. So, yeah, when you think about has there been much prevalence, research on other indications and, financially what that would mean to eyes if you were to do something with a different indication?
Yeah, so we know that childhood absence epilepsy is a small market, but it's a good market for us to establish the platform and the tech.
Right.
And as we go from absence seizures to ADHD to mood disorders, the market grows quite significantly.
Okay.
And so that is our plan.
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Of everything that we've discussed, what are some of the things that you feel like we missed that you want to make sure that whether you're a parent that is watching this or you're an investor that's looking at the company, that they know that, you know, whatever information that is?
You know, the one thing I would share is that, you know, Rachel brings strong clinical domain. She knows the challenges. She knows what works, what doesn't work. And, you know, just coupled with my experience on how to bring innovation collaboratively into a market, I think, you know, we're going to be a formidable team that's going to make this happen. And, you know, we're quite confident in our strategy. We haven't really adjusted too much from our original thinking of where we wanted to take the product. We've had some pivots in our revenue model, which is understandable. But, you know, I think that's one thing I just wanted to reiterate is like sometimes experience with strong domain can overcome the first time founder effect kind of thing, right? From a parent perspective, I mean, I was just floored as to how desperate this population is in terms of having a solution. And for the parents, it's not only just knowing if the kid's getting better in treatment, but from the very beginning, just to be heard by their doctor, like, there's something else going on with my kid. It may not be ADHD, but there's something else. And they don't have a good way of explaining it, right?
Yeah.
And the doctors don't have a good way of eliciting it, right? And so we think by having this kind of technology, you know, that Rachel always says, I want to be the bridge between doctors and parents. I want our solution to be that bridge. Because right now, sometimes it's adversarial.
Right.
Where maybe the doctor dismisses the parent.
Right.
Or maybe the parent just, you know, doesn't listen to the doctor, right? But if they both had the same data they're looking at, objective data, it could help build that bridge. And so after talking with numerous parents, I think we realized we definitely can be that bridge, and I've started to be that bridge and based on some recent cases.
I find the difference between a startup that has a therapy versus a diagnostic is so different. Because if you have a therapy, then you've got a solution to a problem, but there's also a certain level of risk. So there's, you know, is the sample size large enough to really know what you're dealing with? Was the study conducted in a way that it can be mimicked in the country, you know, on a full scale? There's just a lot more risk in my mind to the therapy world versus if you can diagnose something, if that's pretty well established, then really it's an awareness thing. There's not as much risk because you're not going to do harm, especially with a non-invasive diagnostic, like using your phone in order to conduct the software.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a lot of really high level reward versus not a lot of risk in what could happen and kind of the mystery of healthcare investing, if you will. I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, is that kind of how you look at it?
So when you talk about therapy, I guess from our perspective, we're more of a therapeutic assistance, basically, right? So these digital tools can not only be used as a one-time use, but can be used for home use to know if a treatment is working or not. So there is, I would say, less risk in terms of study designs and education awareness. On the remote monitoring side, you're absolutely right. The studies are a little bit more complicated.
Right.
You have to get certain populations, you have to monitor them, they have to come back. There's adherence issues, right, versus a one-time use. Yeah, so we agree with you on that, but Rachel has been a lead PI on many pivotal trials for different types of epilepsy drugs,
Right.
and given her expertise in designing these studies, I mean, we've been able to overcome some of those complexities and risks.
Yeah, because when I think about what you're doing, it's kind of on a parallel path to having a blood test. You do a blood draw, you look at the markers, and you go, okay, well now I can make a decision from here on what I do next. So rather than this is completely non-invasive. You're going through this hyperventilation recorder, and you're getting data that then with that consultative slant
You're right.
to the data, then you have something to make a decision on. And you don't, it's again no different than a blood draw. You're doing it over time.
Right.
So it's multiple points that
That's
you're
correct.
drawing, multiple points that you're making assessments on. And to me, that's what I mean by I view it very different than therapy.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. If I'm trying to bring awareness and drive as a startup,
Yeah.
it seems like that's a real selling point.
Right. Right.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else that you wanted to?
No, I really appreciate you allowing me to share our journey, and I have nothing more to say except that I'm just all in into trying to make an impact. Neurological diseases have been around for more than 5,000 years. I mean, you've seen advancements in diabetes, oncology, cardiology. I'm hoping we can bring some of those same types of advancements fairly quickly to the neurological space.
Like I said, this is a personal thing for me because I hadn't thought about this honestly in a long time because it was so many years ago. I hate to say, but it did kind of push the reflection and thinking about those kids that maybe getting in trouble for not paying attention in class. Maybe the girls or the boys that they think they're looking out the window when they're really just staring off into a seizure. I hope that we can do a little bit more to settle the nerves of some of those kids that are honestly trying to do the best that they can.
Yeah.
And maybe educate those that are analyzing and watching and bringing this to parents' attentions. And for the parents that think that their kid's blowing off the teacher, isn't paying attention, or trying to, get out of doing the work, that it also brings a little bit lower level of anxiety for the parents and the kids alike.
Yeah. As you mentioned, yeah, we're still learning these seizures, and for this particular type of seizure, it's commonly described as a staring seizure, but we've seen more than 300, 400 seizures now in our studies, and we're starting to see where the kid's seizure is where he's stretching and humming. We're starting to see kids whose absent seizures, they'll have rhythmic eye fluttering. They will have rhythmic jaw chewing and just rocking. And so a lot of these normal behaviors could be viewed as disruptive, right?
Right.
It's not just staring anymore is what we're seeing. There's like so many other different ways it presents these seizure types that it even makes it more hard or harder for the parents or teachers to identify.
Right.
As you mentioned, a kid being disruptive,
Right.
where he's stretching and humming,
And he's not even controlling that.
he's not controlling that,
Right.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
That's new to me. Yeah.
yeah,
I can totally see how that would create also almost an attitude, like they're exhibiting this "I don't care" attitude when that's
Exactly.
not at all what they're doing.
right.
So that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you for all that you're doing to bring awareness, to help parents, to help patients. I wish you success. I think it's an amazing, innovative design, and we need more software like this for all types of solutions to problems that currently are either under utilized and the awareness is way too low, or they're it's going in the wrong direction. We're treating people for things that are inaccurate. So we need to get much better innovation in order to get patients on the right path.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate you having on the show. And that'll do it for another episode of Healthcare Tomorrow. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to spending some time with you in the very near future. Thank you.